Go. My name's Christine Novello. I'll be chairing today's meeting on behalf of Dick Rhodes, who's traveling. Before we begin, please join me and stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. To the flag, States of the Republic, and one nation, God. Okay, thank you, everyone. A couple of quick housekeeping notes. As usual, we're broadcasting this meeting on YouTube. So in addition to our in-person attendees, we do have some folks who will be joining us online, just a few right now. But for those of you who are online and listening in, we'll be happy to take your questions and comments. Just know that there's a delay between what you're hearing and what we're actually saying here in the room. So there's a little bit of a delay, bear with us on that. And without further ado, it is 9:04 a.m. and I officially call this meeting to order. We do have, as I mentioned, Chairman Dick Rhodes is traveling today, as is Gary Bosak. So they're both excused. We do have a quorum, though, and we'll continue on to our minutes. So item 2, the approval of minutes. We have minutes that were drafted up for November 7th. Does anybody have any concerns or? Okay, seeing none, we have consensus to accept those minutes and we'll move on to new business. Our CFO, Mr. Cliff Schwan, please take us through our year-to-date financial review.
Thank you, Director Novello. Good morning, everyone. Go through the October year-to-date financials here and answer any questions you might have. Okay, so the finance team decided to add a couple of slides within our presentation here. We want to point out, just kind of give a high-level summary of what we'll be talking about, help keep our thoughts organized as we roll through this presentation every month. Basically, going to start with a monthly and year-to-date income from operations comparison of current year to budget and current year to prior year. And then take that down into the summary of capital impacts, same thing, current year to budget, current year to prior year, and then move into the capital expenditures and talk about where we're at year to date for our capital spend and where we're out on our allowances. And then at the end of it, save the best for last, we talk about the FFB percent. So with that said, we'll get started. Monthly income from operations. Taking a look at October, came in at 19,000 favorable in revenue. Rec and events really did a good job, and with their different various things in the community, and reflected positively in our year over budget, and for a total of 19,000 favorable to budget in the revenue section for the month of October. On the expense side, still battling a little bit on utilities. We're gonna continue to see that to budget, unfortunately, because of the increase in rates as well as the increase in usage. But fortunately, 172 favorable because of some savings that we had in our seed spend this year. The prices came in favorable on landscape maintenance. So gained back some of that deficit from last month, and then year to date you'll see pulled favorably in there. And then same thing with repairs and maintenance. Some timing stuff is evening out for the year that we talked about. Total 172 favorable for the month of October. Looking at the monthly income from operations, actual to budget for October, total favorable of 191,000. Coming into the haymaking season, we're really excited to see the results for November through April. Taking a look at prior year, 148,000 on the revenue side, and versus 23 unfavorable compared to prior year, so 125 in that operating cash outflow, but a favorable 125,000 compared to prior year for the month of October. So looking at year to date, 27,000 favorable on the revenue side. I will say with the impacts to golf in the sports pavilion year to date through October, we're really looking to see how that's going to increase for us moving forward in those two areas. Made some really good investments there. And then looking at the expense structure, like I said, pulled 119 favorable year to date in landscape maintenance. We should hold that with the seed change. So that should hold, which is good news. And still battling that unfortunate increase in utilities. However, 159,000 year to date favorable on the expense side of the ledger. With those two favorable items, 186,000 favorable compared to budget. And then compared to prior year, 120,000 unfavorable. And these are mostly budgeted items in wages and expenses, except for utilities, unfortunately, like we talked about. Looking at the summary of capital items in our capital section, we've got our APF fees for the month of October came in favorable to budget at 46,000, and right on target with our estimated reserve fund allocation. We'll be talking about that with Mr. Miller and on the FI policy, adding that to our annual financial plan, but that's a future conversation. But again, estimated reserve fund allocation is right on target for the year and for the month. Looking at the investment income, again, we're going to be 40 to 45,000 every month favorable to budget, which is good. We did experience an unrealized loss in our valuation change of 407,000, and we'll talk about that a little bit later when we talk about year to date. But if you've been paying attention to the market, November's looking pretty good. So looking at the capital section, 267 unfavorable for the month of October. Important to note, the actual cash items in here that are real money, real cash, are favorable. So the realized gain of 20,000, which was a result of selling some short-term stuff, moving back into long-term. CapTrust did that, made a move at the end of the month of October, and we'll see the benefits of that. But and then the investment income, again, APF fees, the actual cash impact things are good, are favorable for us, and that all at the end of the day goes into the reserve fund. Compared to prior year, we've got favorable on APF fees of 76,000. Again, right on target with reserve fund allocation. Last year, we ended up at $1.5 million, versus this year we budgeted a little over $1 million. So that's always going to track behind prior year, the estimated reserve fund allocation. So the important things are right on budget there. In the investment income, again, tracking ahead of prior year, 41,000. Realized gains ahead at 55. Unrealized compared to last month, October, 337 unfavorable. And then down in the capital, total capital of 234 unfavorable to prior year. But now let's talk year to date. So when we look at APF fees, again, keeping that strong, 109,000 over budget, which is good. Right on that estimated reserve fund allocation. Investment income, 167,000 above budget. And then realized losses, which we talked about in prior months, of 237. That was dealing with the July and August positioning for our reserve fund draw, which will be pulling roughly 4.8 million out of the reserve fund to cover our capital spend for last year. And that'll be happening in December. So we'll do that. Unrealized losses of 915. So I want to talk about that for a second, because we're going to continue to see, a little volatility in the investment market. And that's because of, obviously what's going on, the wars, inflation, all the market changes that impact that. So for example, 915 unrealized valuation change through October. However, if you look at where we're at in November right now, we're we're almost about 800,000 favorable in realized. So that's gonna move up and down as the volatility continues. But I want to stress that we have a 3 to 5 year investment plan, and we're right on track with that. So total 848, unfavorable year to date to budget. Compared to prior year, 418,000 favorable, bolstered by those APF fees, investment income, better performance in the market with our reserve fund. So 418 favorable compared to prior year. Talked about these, the APF fees. We're right on pace, however, with the APF fee increase. That's what's driving the increase over prior year of 257,000. And we're right on pace in November as well. We're eerily close to last year when it comes to our APF, which were 1,114 last year, or 1,100-ish in APFs, and we budgeted roughly 1,000 this year. So if we stay on pace, we'll be ahead of budget by 100. Reserve fund valuation, we talked about that, and the investment income, both favorable. So taking a look at the overall revenues over under expenses, we're compared to budget, we're 662 unfavorable with the 186 favorable in operating and 848 in capital. And then compared to prior year, however, 298 favorable with the operating inflow and the capital related items. Now looking at the capital expenditures, we roughly budgeted roughly 5.5 million in this fiscal year, and we have a projected variance of 359,000. Keep in mind that, I'm sorry, a projected variance of 257,000. Keep in mind that we had recently, through facts and findings, paid for the Echo Mesa well pump, which was 71,000, and we used savings to pay for that. So even with the impact of that, we're still favorable 257,000, and there's some other favorable items that have cropped up in the month of November, so that will increase in the month of November as well. But that savings was mostly due to the lack of need for stabilization, what was budgeted versus what we actually needed for stabilization on our paving projects. And you can see the details to that savings here by line item. Keep in mind that the yellow highlighted items are items that have been completed and paid for, and these will continue to get highlighted as we move throughout the year, especially as we move into January. Most of the stuff will be done or completed. Okay, so looking at the allowances, we have 400,000 in allowances that were budgeted, and 230 roughly thousand of spend POs issued for a $170,000 unspent allowance. We're going to be talking a little bit later about benches for lawn bowling. Keep in mind, there's two areas where we can pay for that, savings and allowance money. So we are through the month of October here with 170,000 left for the rest of the year, basically 8 months of the year. So I encourage you, if you want to move that forward to the board, maybe look at savings to pay for versus allowances if we're going to move that up in the budget to this year. But those allowance items are as follows. Of course, the largest item here being the well pump replacement at Pebblebrook of 119,000. Okay, my favorite thing to talk about, the reserve fund, FFB percent, that is. Good news, we're tracking right at what was budgeted, 49%, with all the impacts of the changes. You know, I really feel good about our reserve fund and that valuation change. I think will continue to, you know, be favorable. We'll keep hoping for that. But even with that impact, we're still right at budget in terms of our FFB percent. And that concludes my presentation, Ms. Novella.
Thank you so much, Mr. Swan. We're very formal today, but thank you. I appreciate that. I look to the rest of our committee members. Any questions? Frank?
Just one, thank you, Christine. Going to slide 26. Perfect. Just have one question. When I think of allowances, I think of those as funds for items that are unexpected. And indeed, there's a number of items on here that basically is safety and structural, unexpected. A well pump certainly is not expected. It's anticipated, but you never know. My question is, library design plans, why would that be put against an allowance instead of put in a budget?
Well, we put that in the allowances because it was not budgeted for. And it was something, if we were going to move forward in our capital planning, it was needed to determine the next step. So I would say that unbudgeted, however needed.
Needed, but there isn't even a way figured out to pay for the project if indeed it gets approved. So I disagree. We'll just move forward, but I disagree. I don't see where design plans have any somewhat urgency that suddenly we've got to use that against an allowance. And as you and I discussed earlier, we are barely halfway into the fiscal year, and we've already dug pretty deep into that allowance in total. So I disagree, but let's keep going.
Really well noted, Frank, on that one. The allowances are at the discretion of our general manager and the staff under 50,000. Is that correct?
They are. And what I will say is, there's always this what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Like, how do you know if you need to plan for a project without start planning for a project? And unfortunately, funds have to be spent to determine how much funds will be needed to continue a project. And this was just one phase that had to happen. If you're for or against the library, that might determine whether you're for or against the spend. But unfortunately, if we needed to move forward with that, that's what needed to be done.
Regardless of how I feel as for or against the project, my point is we've got other items that are in the capital budget requests on a fairly consistent basis for funds for plans to be drawn up. And I don't understand why this 40,000 couldn't have been put into the request that we're considering for fiscal year next one coming up. In other words, why was the urgency that we had to take $40,000 out of our allowances for something that could have been put into the current budget request?
Fair question, just timing, but fair question.
I think it's a very fair question. Thanks for that, Frank. And again, it's the kind of thing, I think we could all use a little bit of an update. Not critical, but thinking the allowances are really more for those critical needs, like a last minute type of thing. So it's input for you to consider.
Yes.
Anyone, and thanks again. Anything else, Frank? Any other questions? Any questions from our members in the audience as well for our CFO? Okay, and there are none online. So thanks again, Cliff.
You're welcome.
So we'll move on to policy reviews. Committee member Lynn Kellis took the opportunity to review both FI 10 and FI 12. Lynn?
Procurement policy, FI 10, has been reviewed and there are no recommended changes. Okay. And investment of associated funds, FI 12, also has been reviewed and no recommended changes.
Thank you, Lynn. How about from the committee on either of those policies, both procurement and for the investment of our association funds? That's FI10 and FI12. Any questions for Lynn? Are there any questions from our fellow members, owner members on FI10 or FI12? Then do we have we would have a recommendation. Well, actually, no, it's not even a recommendation. No action required. Our Chairman Rhodes will bring that to our next governing board meeting where that's appropriate. Thanks, Lynn. So we are cruising right along to item number 3.04, those lawn benches. Cliff, are you going to walk us through the lawn bench discussion? Or is
Yes,
someone
this-
else going to do that for us?
I can do it. So essentially, these are in the part of the capital budget request for next year. However, there was a request from the club to move this up on the schedule. The original quote was over 50,000, and it was the original quote was drawn up to replace all the benches. However, it was determined that only half of the benches need to be replaced. They didn't need the amount of benches, and that dropped the overall price down to half the price, which is roughly 36,000, I believe. And there was a request from the club if we could move that up and get it done before this year, before a tournament they were holding. And so they're requesting to do that this year and move it up on the schedule. So looking for a recommendation to come from this committee.
And the recommendation would be to move forward with spending. I'm sorry, to move forward on spending or not. And does that also include a recommendation on the source of funding, as you were alluding to in your presentation?
I would recommend that with the current state of the allowances at being most 170,000 left out of 400, that if this were to be considered, that we pay for it with savings, if it were to be considered.
Very good. I'm grateful that we have the opportunity to weigh on this one as opposed to the library funding, but thank you for that. So to my fellow committee members, before I weigh in, any thoughts on the recommendation or the idea for the lawn bowling benches? This has been discussed at a couple of governing board meetings as well as and property committees, I believe. I can't remember the exact dates, but this has been
Yes.
discussed quite a bit in terms of being prepared and repairing or replacing, excuse me, some of these benches in advance of the tournament season. Any thoughts on this one from any of the fellow? David?
So Cliff, I'm not a lawn bowler, but is this tournament a local tournament? I know we've done national tournaments in the past. Anybody have an idea? I'm just thinking about it from the perspective of how it presents the community to the outside world.
Apparently, I guess it's an international tournament.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay.
We
thank
have
you.
done some other tournaments as well
We
that I
have,
can
right.
recall. I don't
Yeah.
have the details, but I remember seeing signage and so forth. And just as a reminder, forgive me, I can't remember the exact number. I don't know if there's anybody from staff present, the number of benches that we're talking about. It's not a total replacement, but it basically would be moving that expenditure that we had hoped for next year to move it into this year. Am I correct on that?
That's correct. Being told 46 benches,
Okay,
and it's a project, so we can capitalize that.
right. Gotcha. Do we have any comments or questions from our fellow owner members before we move on to recommendation? Oh, Frank, I'm sorry about that.
Cliff and I, we discussed this a little bit, just a little while ago before the meeting started, and there's a piece of this puzzle that matters. There's also the question of whether or not the benches can actually be ready to be installed prior to March. And that question hasn't been answered yet. in my mind, then I think that we should defer or contingent approval on whether or not these benches can be had from the manufacturer and put in place. I'm all for the project, but unless we can get them in time for the tournament, then this should be put onto next year's budget request.
That's a great observation, and thanks for the insight, Frank, on that one. As a reminder for all of us and for anybody who's attending as well, as a committee, we make recommendations, not decisions, but we can recommend to the governing board, right? So just as a small nuance, I know you know that. Okay, thank you for the timing, and that's an important insight. Any other committee members before, again, any other of our owners, or I don't see anything online yet? No questions from the audience, then. A quick poll. We're not voting, but love to hear from each of you in terms of general support, and then we'll frame it into the recommendation itself. So, Frank, would you give us a start? You don't have to make a recommendation, just do you support the notion? And then you gave a couple of contingencies.
Yes, I do, contingent upon the manufacturer committing to providing the product on a timely basis.
Excellent. Right?
I agree with Frank's observation. If we get them installed in time, then I'd be in favor of that.
Good point. Dwayne?
Same with me. I'm on board with what Frank said.
I agree with Frank's comments as well.
Lynn?
I also agree with Frank.
Excellent. So we do have consensus. Frank, we're not going to put you on the spot and make you actually wordsmith this. Thanks to the beauty of technology, we have YouTube, and we can go back to what you had said. So I believe what I heard, and for our person, Dwayne's taking notes, minutes today as well. What I heard is we have consensus to move forward on recommending the spend from savings, contingent on the timing of the availability. The timing would be to make sure that we have those benches available to be installed for this tournament. Words to that effect. Did I get that right?
Correct.
So thankfully we have that on recording, Dwayne. And so we'll make that recommendation, specifically, Dick will make that recommendation on our behalf to the governing board.
And if they're not available by the time of the tournament, then it gets pushed into next year's budget.
That was what Frank had said. Thank you very much for adding that. We'll go back to that and actually get the contingency is on timing, and if not available, we would recommend holding off until next year. Yes, sir.
Cliff said that it's already in next year's budget, and so nothing would need to be done. It's there.
That's right.
It will come out of next year's budget
As
if we
planned.
move it forward.
That's right, as planned. We're not recommending a new budget item. That's correct. Thank you, and thanks for the correction. Okay, we're going to move on to Family Pass. That's item number 3.05. Now, just as a quick reminder for those of us not on the committee, this notion of a Family Pass or a discount, we've called it Family Pass, but it could take many actual names. So this notion came up last year in the winter spring of 2023 from a couple of different sources, but officially made at each year we have a full meeting of all of our members, if you will, one full meeting at the end of our fiscal year. So I believe that meeting was in June of 2023, where this was brought to the governing board by members with some ideas. The governing board then took this on board and asked the Budget and Finance Committee, us, to take a look at this and to make a recommendation on the viability, the financial viability of the notion of the idea. So that occurred when we started our fiscal year and our meeting schedule. We've had this on our agenda 4 different times: September 5th, September 19th, October 10th, and October 24th. We've had a couple of discussions. We've had several members make comments, and we've had many comments amongst us. We tasked our very hardworking staff in budget and finance and operations to come back to us with lots of analysis, which they did. So today what we're endeavoring to do is to have this discussion and close this with a recommendation of some sort. Just as a couple of reminders, the recommendation doesn't need to be all of the details of how to implement and so forth, but it needs to be a recommendation on what we believe is best, on what we would like to see going forward as a committee, a recommendation. We're not making a decision. This is not an official yes, no, thumbs up, thumbs down. This is more our recommendation from a Budget and Finance Committee standpoint on the viability of this notion. And the recommendation would then go back to the governing board and to our other committees. Because again, as a reminder, one of the key notions fiscally is that this is still going to cost us some money. And the analysis that was done by Cliff and the team showed some specifics about how expensive this could be. This is not huge, but it's still a sizable expenditure depending on your analysis. Dick did a couple of pieces of analysis that showed, based on your assumptions, it would be somewhere between $120,000 and $150,000 of impact to our operation budget. So it's not a small amount, but it's something that we would need to consider going forward. What would be the source of that, and how would we handle that kind of thing going forward? The timing, therefore, is important. We keep talking about this. We all know, and I think everybody who is here knows, the creation of our budget really starts now, and we need to act with a recommendation sooner rather than later. Can't continue to move this forward because the governing board needs to make a recommendation, or a decision, I should say, and therefore our operations team would be able to include that in our operating budget numbers for next year. So that's the reason why now is the time to start making those recommendations. A recommendation could take many different forms. Like I said, the what, consider that as we're discussing. We don't have to worry about the details of how. Also remember that this will, because there's a revenue impact, an operations budget impact, whenever such a notion would take place or not take place, the rest of our committees and the rest of our owner members would also like the opportunity to weigh in. So we're weighing in as Budget and Finance. We want to be able to make that recommendation back to the governing board and to our other committees so they could consider it as well. So that's my intro, long-winded though it is. So we asked, again, for those of you who are here amongst us, we knew that this was coming onto our agenda and asked ourselves to go back to our notes, go back to all of the other member comments, and we're not going to hear a presentation, although Cliff and the rest of the team are here to do that, make answer questions for us as needed, but we've really already seen it. So with that, yes, sir.
Sorry, there's one new piece of information that was requested from this committee and added to this presentation. And Terry, if you can bring it up, it's just this committee asked for what are the other communities doing. So Bill went back and did some research, reached out to those GMs.
Thank you.
And so we do have some new information, and that's posted up right now. It's the last slide on the packet. So just so everybody knows that information has been gathered, and
Thanks.
there's a table there with some of that information. But other than that, there's no other new information.
Thank you. Appreciate your calling that to our attention. So with that information and clarification, let's start first. And again, for those of you listening at home or here in the audience, you all have the opportunity to weigh in as we go. So like to hear from everybody in terms of your thoughts on the topic at hand. We always tend to put the people sitting at the end of the table on the hot spot. Today, I'm going to do something different. I'm going to ask David Miller, sort of in the middle, to start us off. And that way, Lynn and Frank don't have to always be tasked with going first.
Gee, thanks, Christine.
You're certainly welcome. I always get assigned to sit at the ends of the table.
Yeah.
So
when I went back and looked at this purely from a financial perspective, as you pointed out in your comments, this is a net loss of revenue to the community. Okay, so I always look at it from the point of view of, if we lose revenue, then the question becomes is what do you give up? Because it's got to be a zero-sum game. So I look at that, and I also kind of think of the social aspects of this, because while there are people who want to bring their families in during holiday seasons. We have people in our community that frankly don't want children in the pools. Okay? I mean, that's just the harsh reality of it. They just don't think they should be there. So taking all those things in balance, I can't see just a giant driver in my mind to go do this. And I have to admit, in going back and reviewing my notes and looking at the presentation, there's a bylaw involved in the guest cards. And I've read this bylaw half a dozen times, and I'm still confused about what it actually says. It says, holders of tenant activity cards, owner members, associate members may purchase a guest card that should be marked on a per diem basis. So if I remember correctly, the suggestion had been made that we sell a weekly family pass. So what I guess I'm trying to get to is that even if we wanted to do that, are we going to have to go have a bylaw vote in order to implement that?
Excuse me, we'd have to presume that whatever we would implement would be in alignment with the bylaws, or we couldn't do it without that vote, as you said.
All right.
Excuse me. So, good point, but
So
we
it's-
always
it's-
operate in alignment.
So
with
it
those
sounds
bylaws.
like we're back on a per day thing, it to be in line with the bylaws regardless of what we do.
If, I would presume that, again, the how this would be implemented would always be in alignment, but that's a very good point, that it would have to be in alignment.
Well, so kind of to sum up things, I just, again, purely from a budget and finance perspective, I don't see a driver that's a benefit to the community to do this, community as a whole. So,
There are a lot of, and you mentioned, though, the bylaw and the discussion of guest policies in general. There have been a number of our committees I think, we've all been aware of that. A number of the committees and the governing board overall has been looking at and trying to align and come up with a more consistent overall guest policy. Very challenging because the sports pavilion, golfing, all of our recreation facilities have some different nuances in how they're being used. But nonetheless, we're trying to come up with some unity, some consistency is more like it. And to your point about coming up with a way to basically pay for this, it would either be what do we give up or what additional fees would we collect in the future? And again, that's where, to my thought, that's where reaching out to some of the other committees, to the other owner members, as well as, leaving it in, the competent hands of the governing board, but also the other committees would want a chance to weigh in on some of that from an overall guest policy. So that could be part of our recommendation if there is one as well. But thank you. Anything else? And thanks for being voluntold to go first. Dwayne?
Okay, I'm looking at slide, it's not marked. The quantity of guest passes sold from the first of the year through 9/26. It's a pie chart. And it looks like for 3/4 of the year, we generated 10,000 from 17 age and under, and 31,000. So that's approximately 40. So you add another quarter's worth of time, maybe we'll end up at 60,000 total revenue for guest passes. Is that just,
It's
not-
just quantity of passes.
That's not
Yes.
quantity, okay. What,
If you extrapolate that out, Dick had done that. If you extrapolate it out by the guest fees today, $6, $4 per, it comes out to closer to, I believe it's in the presentation, 228. Let me look.
I didn't see it. Maybe
If
I missed
not,
it.
we can do the quick math here. 213,203.
Okay, okay. So,
And I'd like to claim I did that in my head. That's, Dick had done that in advance for us. Go ahead.
okay. So I'm not opposed to a family guest pass, like a 5-day discounted pass percentage. My concern is thinking ahead, if we did this, how could somebody abuse it? You don't want people abusing this new pass, so that would be a concern that we'd want to consider. But I'm not opposed to like a 5-day discounted family pass of some, 20%, 25% discount. I think it would be a nice thing to offer to the community for when you have guests visit, like your kids come with their grandkids, to be able to take them to the pool more often and not have a $100 plus cost of doing that. But those are my thoughts.
When you say abuse, Dwayne, any more, do you mean financial or bringing in people that are?
Yeah, if it's such a big discount, could somebody just continually offer an outsider that pass, and so that becomes, instead of,
I see.
that person just using it once or twice a year, that they're continuing to use it throughout the year.
And I believe Bill Schwind, when he made one of his presentations, I believe that's in there, because we have some history about that and some concerns from the past where those levels of abuse had either occurred or were of concern in past years. So
Yeah.
noted.
And then one last thing, on the new slide, it
Can we have
says-
one conversation at the table, please? Thank you.
On the new slide, it's in red. It says, do you offer family or guest passes? If yes, please explain. And they were all no's, including Sun City was a no. And I thought, Bill, in a previous meeting, you thought you said that they did offer some sort of a discount. No? Okay. No. So nobody else is doing this out of these 4 communities. Okay.
Thanks, Dwayne. Right?
Well, initially, I personally thought, well, gee, a family pass would be a great thing for our community. And then I started pondering the complications that would be come about from that. Who constitutes a family member? Is it just children and grandchildren, or my brothers and sisters and their kids, so on and so forth? So there'd be a lot of logistics to work out of that. And then for how many of them would be included in a pass? Some of those kinds of simple things. Then I stepped back and started thinking, as David had mentioned, that as a budget and finance committee, our role here is to look at what is in the best interest of the community from a financial standpoint. And then I automatically go to how many members of our community would actually participate in a family pass program. David had already mentioned that there are people who don't want kids at our swimming pools. They would most likely object to such a plan. Then there are others who, gee, my kids come twice a year and I'd love to bring them and my grandchildren in, and it costs me $125 every time they do.
Right.
So, this is where we are. So I stepped back and as a budget and finance committee, I'm not sure that I think that the benefit to the community, limited as it may be, would not warrant the amount of work that would be required to govern this process. That's all my thoughts.
Thank you, Ray. Frank?
If anybody thinks that I stay up all night wondering what I'm going to do about this, they'd be wrong. I look at the rates that people pay to play golf, and there's an outside play rate and there's a member guest rate, and the differential I think is $2. So the member guest is going to pay $2 less per round. It's a nominal sum, but in the big picture, I think that if we allow some kind of a guest pass to where guests can now get in the pool for less money than they did because they've got a weekly pass, we're going to open up a can of worms, and we're going to have a lot of people coming in here and asking for a break for this or a break for that, or perhaps the differential of $2 between member guests and outside play at golf. That's not enough now. We need that to be $4 because my guests are going to be here for a week and they're going to play 4 times. So I'm kind of against the idea at all. Just leave things the way they are. And there already has been an accommodation made for guests that we even allow them to come in. I'm sure that there are communities that just frown on it completely. So I'm against it.
Okay, I'm going to have I had done a very lengthy introduction, and, oh, Lynn, I forgot because we went, we took David. Please, go ahead, Lynn, I
That's quite all right.
apologize.
I actually did spend some time looking at 3 different scenarios, thinking that, oh, this might be a really good thing to do. And coming back to the realization, especially at the discount pass, if you only have 2 people that you want this discount pass for instead of 5, you might as well just lower rates. I can't see a win, and I hate to say this because I really thought it sounded like a good idea, but I can't see a win for our community with us doing a 5-day discounted pass. And again, you know, that's why we're here, is to be good stewards of our community money. So my thoughts are, in looking at this chart that we have, the last page, there are no other communities that are offering this. We are a little bit higher than some of the communities in our expenses there. And I don't know if maybe we would consider $5 for adults or not, but I would say my opinion on, after doing the research on this, is that it probably would not be a good idea for our community.
Thank you, and I do apologize. I took you off the spot and then forgot to come back to you, so that's the risk, right? So now I'll turn it over. I'll have opportunity to make more discussions if necessary with a recommendation that's made to the governing board. So I'd love to hear from our owner members, from our residents, and anybody online as well. So again, when you step to the microphone, you'll give us your name and rec card number, and the same thing online if you would do the same.
My name's Chris Waller, 140558. As I was listening to this, I see 2 problems. I see one is we don't want to lose revenue. And I see 2 is that mostly families that come here feel a burden with their 2, 3, 4 little kids and mom and dad, you know, and it gets pretty pricey. So as I was listening to everybody talk, I thought that a nice compromise might be just to have 6 and under free. If you look at that, it's a very small impact to our revenue. I saw 25% or 17 and under. I don't know what percentage of that are 12-month-olds that come into the pool for, but I thought it might be a pretty nice compromise and would significantly help the families that probably feel the burden. If I have a friend of mine and want to invite an adult friend, they don't mind paying a pass, right? It's all about the families of 5 or 6, and you had 2 or 3 little ones in there, it just really kind of doubles their cost.
Thank you for that input.
Christine? May I?
Yes, the rest of the folks can line up. Go right ahead.
You know, that's a very good point. And the last time my son and his family were here, they have 3 little kids that were all under the age of 5. And we paid for one, and the 2 smallest ones, they were twins, were, I think, less than 2, and they were free. So there is a cutoff in there somewhere, I think, or at least the person took pity on us when we checked in and gave us the thing. So, I mean, can somebody clarify, is there actually an age limit that?
I don't believe there is.
Okay.
But the notion of something like that, actually codifying that might be
Yeah, that might not, that's a great idea.
compromise. It would be, there would still be a loss of revenue, but it might be something that could be considered. So good point.
I
But,
think,
just
that
for our staff, I don't believe there's a cutoff. I think there was,
there's
somebody
pity,
said-
so.
yeah.
But, I guess the thing is too, when you have a bunch of really little kids, you're not hauling them to the pool every day. They just, they go and 30 minutes later, they're ready to leave again. So, I don't know that you're going to be taking them 5 days in a row, but.
they'll think you are, though. Anyway, sir, Nick.
Hi, Nick Turner, 131829. Just speaking personally here. One is actually a request for more information, but if this looks like it's going to be a no, I don't know that there's any, they wouldn't spend the time getting it. But I didn't see the actual revenue loss figure in the presentation, so I assume that that's based on some assumptions about how many passes would be sold at what price. So it'd be interesting to know what that is. And it would also be interesting to know, if we can dig into the data, how many residents are buying more than 5 passes on any one single day, and how many residents are buying more than 50 in a week, something like that, because that would give you an idea of how many might be sold. But anyway, just moving on to opinion, I don't really mind the idea of helping out a family when you know somebody who's got a large family who are here for a week. I don't mind helping them out in some way with a small discount, but I don't want to subsidize an owner resident who's got a large family that lives in Surprise, who are going to be here once a week or several times a month and coming in. I don't want to subsidize the leisure activities of a local family, but I don't mind helping out a resident who's got a large number of people coming to impose on them for a week. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Turner. I think that was what Dwayne might have been referring to as well, the notion of it's the how would we implement that? I think that's a very good point. We value your input.
Jolene Piaskowski, 132268. The family pass, I think, is a good idea only because you do have families that come. Like when my daughter comes, there's 5. So it's $24 a day. But however, they're older, okay? Those kids are going to swim from 10 to 1 the whole time. I do agree with David and this gentleman here that 6 and under would be great. Lewis, who is 3.5, just came, paid the $4 for him to go in, and his mom and dad, and Lewis wanted to leave after a half hour. And I don't like it here. Okay, so 6 and under might accommodate those other families where they don't swim the whole time. And the other people, like my other family, for them to swim for $25 for, I guess, 3 hours, I don't have a problem with it. It would be nice if I had a family pass, but it is the 6 and under that become a problem because they don't want to stay for the 3 hours. They don't want to go miniature golfing. They want to do nothing, right? They just want to have fun. So that's my comment.
Thank you for that, Jolene. So it sounded, Jolene, and please don't let me put words in your mouth. You wouldn't allow that. But it sounds like the notion of some kind of a cutoff age or a minimum age is okay. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure that I heard you correctly. I wouldn't put words in anybody's mouth, for that matter, or I don't intend to.
Gary Bach, 135435. I think the one thing that when we do this, there's probably families that have more children, and there's families that have none. So I think if we're going to do it, because there may be that family that has 2, or the family that has 5, but they only come for 3 days, they can't take advantage maybe of the pass. So they're going to say, why am I not getting a discount? So I think if we're going to give a discount, it needs to be something that applies to everybody so evenly. So if you're giving it for a week, but somebody else is coming for 4 days, they don't get the discount. So I think whatever discount we do, it should be even for anybody getting the discount. Thank you.
Thanks for that. We appreciate the input. Again, I don't see any comments yet coming in from our online viewership, but we still have to grapple with the fact that there would be a loss of revenue, and there is still a lot of discussion among some of the other committees and at the governing board about overall guest policy. So my views would be, in terms of the how, part of that would benefit, if you will, the discussion would benefit from having a broader discussion across the committees. That's just my view. I am concerned that we need to make a recommendation, as I mentioned, so that our staff can start assembling our operations budget for the next fiscal year And that's the reason why we wanted to have the discussion today. In terms of making a recommendation, based on the input that we heard and that we've heard from each other as well as from our fellow owner members, does anyone want to put forward the wording for a recommendation on behalf of the committee? I know this is always, it's always a challenge. How do we put this together? If not, even just, another quick roundtable. This time we will start with Lynn so I don't forget her in terms of, based on what we've heard now, what are your notions without having to wordsmith it?
My thoughts,
Or do they change from?
they do.
Okay.
They do, after hearing some opinions out here. I personally think, yes, 5 and under, it might be a good idea, or somewhere in that area, to discuss an age to allow those children in free. I think it would definitely give those families a break, and it's a good point. It's been brought up a couple times that smaller children, you're there for a half hour and you're done. And I can see where that would be a hardship, paying the money and then finding out they're done in a half hour, and then they want to go the next day. So that's my thought, is that we should consider possibly a 5 and under free.
And thank you, Lynn. If there are any thoughts about how to, where that money would come from, we don't know what that dollar value would be.
Right.
And we could make some assumptions, but it would be a portion of what we currently have. So as we go around the table, if you have any thoughts about that we want to bake into a recommendation.
I agree. We don't know what the money would be.
Okay.
We're looking at 17 and under right now as being 25%, I believe. And so 5 and under would certainly be reduced there. There aren't a lot of grandparents that, if they only have the little ones, that would be bringing them to the pool.
Okay.
But there are some. So I guess my recommendation would be that we offer a family pass discount. Well, not offering a family pass discount, but offer a 5 and under free as guests.
Okay. But the guest policy would not be impacted. So, David, any thoughts?
Yeah, I would be supportive of putting some sort of age cutoff because, again, attention spans being incredibly short. And, we've keyed a lot on the pool, but little kids like to go play mini golf, and they do there was a whole long list of activities in here. So attention spans are not just short in the pool, they're, short everywhere. So I do think an age cutoff, and, I don't know whether that's 5, 4, pick a number, would be of benefit to the community. And again, the reality is, based on these numbers, I just don't know how many people would take advantage of a family pass. So like when I was here, my kids were here the last time, they wanted to go do stuff literally one day. The rest of the time they wanted to hang out at the house and do whatever. So in a situation like that, it's cheaper for me just to go ahead and pay the daily fees. And so there, it would be good if we could give people a range of options. So I guess just to sum up, I'd say I'd support some sort of age, de minimis age. You just say you're free if you're less than that. I don't think that would have a huge impact on revenue. And frankly, I think with what we know right now, we can't say what that is. We just don't have enough information. So put an age cutoff in there. That way you don't have to change any of the bylaws, and you just can move forward and put that in place with a relative amount of ease.
No changes to bylaws and no changes to policy. Right?
Yeah, I agree with David. I think the most straightforward, easiest way to implement something like this is do an age discount there versus coming up with some weekly discount. That'd be difficult to manage, difficult to for everybody to implement something like that. The age, I think 6 is a good age for the cutoff. Personally, I'm in agreement with David and Lynn.
Ray?
I agree. I don't think a family pass works, and I'd be fine with a age restriction.
Frank?
Ever the contrarian that I might be, we already have an age cutoff at 17. I think that putting another age cutoff for somebody about this big, I don't know where, further complicates the check-in process. Do they have to verify the ages? Do they verify the ages now? If someone comes in and says, well, my child is only 16 and they're really 17, and if people think that everybody in this world is honest, that's why they build jails. And so I'm sure, absolutely positive, there are people who are going to want to push the system a little bit. I think it was Nick Turner, the resident here, who also brought up, what happens if somebody's, and there are many residents in this community that have families in Surprise and children and grandchildren that live in Surprise. And I'm sure some of those grandchildren are under 5 or 6 or whatever number gets assigned. And so, sure, they could be brought in here as guests, but where do you draw the line? Do you let them come in here all summer long, allowing them to have a discount pass constantly? I think that listening to Jolene, these are relatives. Jolene, give me a head nod. These are relatives that come in from out of town, okay? And so I can see where Jolene is coming from, but I think that it gets complicated because what do you tell the people that have family in Surprise? Well, you'll need to show a resident card that they live somewhere else. What do you do? Those people are not the ones that we want to be giving this card to. And so I think that we're just making something unnecessarily complicated. I think Nick Turner also brought up that there's some data missing here. How many people actually go in and spend a lot of money in a 1-week period on guest fees? Are we talking about 30 residents, 50 residents, or 3,000 residents? We don't know. So that's my position at the moment. My answer to this proposal is just going to continue to be no.
Thanks, Frank. And again, what some of the other committee members were weighing in on was the notion of an age, a minimum or maximum age, whatever, to minimum, a minimum age to qualify for free entry, with our keeping our policy exactly the same. All the things that you were talking about could happen today, and probably do. As I recall, and again, I know we had said we really wanted to take the time to talk about this as a committee. Our staff told us on several occasions that that's one of the concerns, and our frontline folks, the folks, we keep talking about the pool, that's the most popular, right? So our frontline folks who are checking in our members with their guests are the ones that would take the blowback from having to enforce the policy, whatever it is, and they do today. So we're not talking about, if I heard some of the other members, we were talking about this notion of keeping the policy exactly as it is and imposing for a certain age and below, we would say no fee for that, right? So, Cliff, I'm sorry I don't mean to put you on the spot because we said, oh, this is just for the committee, but am I correct? Please refresh my memory. I believe that there were a few of those concerns that were embedded in earlier presentations. Concerns about abuse and so forth, right?
Yeah. So yes, there were some of those concerns. I would say that we would now, if we put an age restriction in, another age restriction in, it would be tracked. It would just be in at $0. So because we would still want to get that activity
Right,
on the
we'd
books.
still be checking people in.
Exactly. So, yeah.
So we do have we have a member that's commenting online, so I'm going to read those out. Tracy Anderson, card number 132045. This is regarding this is about the lawn bowling benches, so we'll come back to that in a moment. Let's finish this conversation, and then Tracy, we'll come back to your comments so that we have those. We'll do that in the next line item. So back to the notion of pass. If I hear correctly, I'm not saying it's unanimous, right? But it's consensus. It sounds like, is there a consensus from the rest of the Budget and Finance Committee to put forward a recommendation to impose or create an age limit under which a child would not require a guest fee. We've heard a couple of different ages. I think Lynn said 5, a couple of other folks said 6, and under would still be subject to the same policy, but there would be no guest fee. I believe that's what I heard from you. Not from all, but.
I'm in favor of that.
So that would be our collective recommendation. I believe it's certainly not unanimous. We've heard from at least one of our committee members that is not in favor. But that would be, do we have a consensus, or does anybody want to correct that recommendation before we move forward? Again, the recommendation as I heard it is the Budget and Finance Committee would recommend to the governing board the creation of an age limit underneath which there would be no guest fee associated. Our recommendation is inclusive of the fact that there is no policy change to the existing guest policy. How did I do? All right. Any further questions or comments from our members? From staff? Okay. So we'll go forward with that one too. And that will be our recommendation on the notion of family pass. This is not a decision for anybody who's listening and anybody who's here. This is a recommendation to the other governing board standing committees and to the governing board itself for their consideration. Thank you all for that. So that wraps up agenda point 3.05. That'll be in general comments later because it had nothing to do with that agenda point. So we're going on now to those general comments. Thank you for the reminder, Lynn. So first, committee comments. We'll start this time with Ray Davis. I'm mixing it up today. Ray, any comments?
No comments.
Frank?
Nothing further.
Thank you. Lynn?
No comment.
David?
No comments.
No further comments.
Thank you, Dwayne. From me, I want to thank the folks who are here online commenting as well as here in person to take the time to be a part of our process. We always love seeing you here. With that, we'll turn to guest comments from members. While you're preparing those, if any, I'm going to now take those comments from Tracy Anderson, 132045. Tracy is speaking on the notion of the lawn bowling benches. The first tournament is January 25th. So she can't be here now. She's in a meeting in Sun City. The thought is for 48 benches this year for the 23-24 budget. So she's just contributing. The timing may be different, right? I believe our earlier recommendation was to ensure that the expenditure would take place before the first international tournament. So we'll do a little homework on that, right? Does it change our recommendation, committee? Just quick consensus. I believe our recommendation, and Dwayne and I will go back to that, was to ensure that the expenditure would take place in a way that would ensure the benches could be installed in time for that global tournament. Lynn, any changes?
I do question, we're being told that there's a tournament in January. Is that the first of many to come?
We don't know. I think we'll have to ask our the rest of the staff as well as the lawn bowling. That's my understanding.
Thank you.
I think this is one member who's piping in to give us the notion of one tournament. It may not be the large tournament in question that we were asking about. We'll have to do a little homework. No, anything else? Well then, at the record-setting time of 10:10, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you again for your participation and your attention.